Well, today we are in part 2 of this series that we've entitled Level Up, where we're talking about how do we take our faith to the next level. And what I love about this whole discussion is we're talking about we're talking to everybody regardless of where you're at on the spectrum of faith. I mean, you could be here today, and when you hear the word faith, you would say, or watching or listening online, and you would say, hey, I don't really have faith in God. I don't have faith in Jesus. In fact, I have far more questions than faith. And the reason that you're here, the reason you're watching or listening is because, that cute girl, or maybe that cute guy, or maybe because your mama guilted you, so you're around guilt or whatever. And that's where you would be at perhaps with faith, or perhaps you're here, or you're watching and listening, and you say, man, I feel like my faith is gigantic. And the coolest thing is this: regardless where you're at on the spectrum of faith, what we're talking about throughout this series is how can every single one of us take a step and level up our faith. In fact, when we think about faith and, what we're talking about, we're actually answering and asking and answering this question. It's, what fuels or facilitates the development of active, enduring, next level faith? Well, what does it mean, next level faith? When I say that, here's what I'm talking about. It's a kind of faith that does feel active. It feels alive. It's a kind of faith that feels adventurous, where you're waking up every day of your life and it feels like, man, I got such meaning and purpose to my life and the activities of my life. It's the kind of faith that you trust God in the good times of life and in the extraordinary hard times of life. It's like my faith doesn't move as a result of circumstance. I just trust God and that He's working. It's a kind of faith that just provides a peace. Maybe you've heard, this idea of peace that transcends all understanding, like just, guys, that's real. That's real. That's the kind of faith, that next level faith. It's the kind of faith that, it's almost impossible to offend you. I mean, yes, you're human, and yes, man, things people say and do can be hurtful, and that's all part of it. But in terms of the offense of it, man, your identity is so secure and so firm in the object of your faith, which is Jesus Christ, that it's almost impossible to offend you, which means you're just curious. It means that people of other faiths and people of other political persuasions and people who are radically different from you, I mean, it's not like, oh, you're bad and I'm good. It's like, no, I'm curious. Like, tell me more. I'm curious about that. I mean, that's the kind of faith, and it's the kind of faith that you just go, man, God is with me. I mean, just think about this for a second in your life. If you knew that God was with you, what would you do? If you woke up every single morning, you go, man, I absolutely know without a shadow of a doubt, God is with me. What would you do? That's the kind of faith we're talking about. And guys, I really think it's possible. I think that kind of faith is not some religious statements and people say those things to make people feel good. It's real. It's tangible. It's experiential. And for every single one of us, regardless where you're at in your faith spectrum, I want to show, and I want us collectively to talk about how we can take a step to that next level of faith. So that's what we're talking about. Now, last week, as we kicked off this whole discussion, I said this: the thing that kind of throws a wrench in this discussion, or the thing that makes it really confusing when we're talking about faith, is actually the word and the definition of faith. Because when it comes to the way we define faith, oftentimes you think, faith equals emotion, faith equals feelings, faith equals hope and optimism. And that's not faith. Faith, every single time the word faith pops up, I want you to think about faith has an object. Faith always has an object. For example, you have faith in your boss because your boss is a person of integrity and character. Therefore, that faith in the object, your boss, actually fuels the emotion of hope and optimism that you're going to get a paycheck. Or, you have faith in your car, the object, because you change your oil every 3,000 miles and you make sure the, mechanical integrity is good. Therefore, it fuels the emotion of hope and optimism that you're going to arrive on time. And that's where kind of faith and emotion meet. It's really important, perhaps think about it this way, that the object of our faith is what fuels the feelings of faith. And if that object has character and integrity and you have confidence in that and trust in that, well, then that fuels all kinds of these feelings that we often talk about when it comes to faith. So as you think about that, here's what's really cool. When you read the Bible, specifically the letters of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and those are letters all about the life of Jesus, and you begin to explore his life and look at what he said and look at what he did and just kind of the adventure. I mean, it's really cool just to follow Jesus. And you're looking at his life, one of your observations you're going to make is Jesus over and over and over said, hey, I want you to make me the object of your faith. Hey, I want you to make me the object of your faith. Jesus did this all the time. And the way he would say it is this. He would say, believe in me. Believe in me. Put your trust, put your confidence in me. And there's a great promise with putting our faith in Jesus Christ, making him the object of our faith. I mean, his promise is to say, hey, you're forgiven, for real. Past, present, and future sin, you are forgiven, which means you have peace with God because I satisfied God's justice for your sin on the cross. I was the sacrifice on your behalf because I love you. It means that faith in Jesus, you can have peace, that you can really have a new identity, you can have meaning and purpose, and that your eternity is secure in God with heaven. I mean, it's incredible, incredible news. But here's the thing, perhaps, you haven't thought about, what we talked about last week or you haven't been taught. Jesus actually had an equal invitation. You know, believe in me, and then he had another one. And here's what he said in Luke chapter 9. He said, if any of you wants to be my follower, you must give up your own way. Take up your cross daily and follow me. If you want to try to hang on to your life, you're going to lose it. And then look at this. But if you give it up your life for my sake, you'll save it. In other words, Jesus had two invitations, equally so. And his two invitations, as you follow him throughout the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the Gospels, is believe in me. Make me the object of your faith. That's foundational. Equally so, follow me. Follow me. In fact, if you were here last week, I was like, you know, Jesus is kind of like a coin. You know, a coin has two sides. And I didn't know this until this week, but did you guys actually know there's a Jesus coin on Amazon? And I'm just kind of one of those like gadget freaks, and I ordered one. So if you're ever curious, this is my Jesus coin. It costs about $8. So if you're interested in a Jesus coin, here you go. But these things, I know it's super cheesy because I look at Jesus and I'm like, he's got a perm and his beard is just so well groomed. And I'm sure that's true, right? But for the sake of the illustration, just go with me for a second. When it comes to Jesus, this is so important to understand when it comes to Christianity and the adventure and when people talk about all these emotions and experiences. Jesus looks at you and me and says, hey, kiddo, on one side of the coin, that's believe in me. Put your faith and confidence in me. But equally so, I want you to follow me. Follow me. Follow me is where the rubber meets the road. Follow me is going to come at a cost. Follow me is difficult and extraordinarily, at times, extraordinarily uncomfortable. This is why Jesus said, I want you to take up your cross daily. Cross representing, illustrating to you and I. Man, this is going to be uncomfortable. This is going to be hard. This is going to come at a cost to you. Oh, but do this daily. And what it means to follow Jesus is saying, Jesus, as we just sang about, I surrender. Jesus, I surrender. If I'm going to call you my Savior, I might as well just surrender. What you say is true. What you say about morality, what you say about sex, what you say about sexuality, what you say about relationships, what you say about money. And it's just so hard. Okay, Jesus, I trust you. And I'm telling you, following Jesus is what activates your faith. Following Jesus is what takes your faith to the next level. But the problem with this and the tension is throughout the last several decades, the church has taken the Jesus coin, if you will, and just said, hey, let's just talk about one side of that coin. Hey, just here's what I want you to do. I want you to believe in Jesus. Bow your heads, close your eyes. It's just a very personal relationship between you and Jesus. And guys, that's important. I'm not dismissing that at all. That is foundational. But the other side of the coin, follow me. If you're going to trust me with all of eternity, I think it's logical to say, trust me with this finite period of life that I am the author of life. I actually designed you. And guys, when it's just about believe, here's what happens to our faith. And I've seen this over and over and over. If it's just about believe, then maybe the first 3 months of your faith, 6 months of your faith, 9 months, 12 months, 18, up to about 24 months has been my observation. This is my personal opinion. I mean, it's like, man, Christianity is cool and Jesus is cool and the church is relevant. Oh, wow, I didn't know this. And this is how he loved me, unconditional love, grace. Wow, it is amazing. You begin to understand these things. It's really cool. But if you don't follow, before long, your faith begins to fatigue. And you begin to go, well, the church isn't doing it for me any longer. Buck, you're not doing it for me any longer. Jesus, yeah, he's really important, but, I haven't thought about him much. He's just not that relevant to me. But for my eternity, yes, and forget it, yeah, but, and before long, your faith fatigue moves to a place of faith atrophy, to where it's like your faith is shrinking. And Jesus, he really isn't doing it for me any longer. The church, this thing you talk about, Buck, adventure and active, it's not alive for me. And right after faith atrophy, the next step is I walk away from my faith. Guys, I don't want you to have that kind of faith. I want you to have a faith that is alive and is active and meaningful and purposeful. I want you to have that security through your object of your faith, Jesus Christ, to withstand the storms that are going to come our way and the successes that are coming our way. And so this is why we're doing this whole series. We're talking about, level up. And specifically, what are the 5 ways, or the 5 things that helps our faith go to that next level, again, regardless where you're at on the spectrum of faith. So that is what we're talking about. And last week we talked about the first one, an observation I've made over and over and over, and I've seen in my life and the lives around me, that when we prioritize private disciplines, when a discipline becomes a habit, becomes a lifestyle, it leads to life change. That's true in our lives, and that's also true when it comes to faith. And there's all kinds of disciplines we could talk about. I mean, we could talk about giving, we could talk about reading the Bible, we could talk about prayer, we could talk about fasting, and on and on and on it goes. But last week, we talked about one specific one. And if you were not here last week, I want to encourage you to go online and watch and listen to what we said, because the one we talked about, I think, is so helpful and instrumental to see our faith go to the next level. Now, today, we're going to talk about the second thing that I've seen over and over in my life and the lives around me take our faith to that next level. And here's what I want you to think about to kind of set this up. I want you to think about in your life something I think all of us have said, I've said, you've said, in some form or fashion is this, that we've said this: I'm so glad he showed up in my life when he did. Or we've said something like this in our life: I'm not sure I would have made it through this without her. Or perhaps you said something like this: I wouldn't be where I am today without them. That as you think about your life, perhaps if you kind of break it up in chapters and think about different areas and aspects of your life, you're like, oh yeah, I just wouldn't be the man I am today. My marriage wouldn't be where it is today. I wouldn't have the opportunities I have today without him, without her, without them, without those connections and those people in my life. We've all said that. I think about my life. When I was, Jill and I got married, and we're still married. When I was married, that was weird. Sometimes you're like, I actually said that. Anyways, so Jill and I, we were married a couple years, and I remember I came to a crossroad in my life, and it was a genuine crossroad. I don't have time to give you all the context, but my crossroad at that point was, you either need to follow Jesus, Buck, or you need to follow the world. It was really that, because I was playing games, kind of these religious games, and I was like, oh, I'll go to church, and that'll be fun, and then I'm home, and it's me time, and it's my time, and whatever I want, I was just going back and forth, and that tension was growing in my life, and I'm like, okay, you just need to decide, just don't play games. And so, the church we were going to, I started asking around. I was like, what does it look like to follow Jesus? I don't even know what that means. And somebody introduced me to this guy named Peter. And I met Peter, and I said, Peter, would you show me or talk to me, or, what does it look like to follow Jesus? And he said, sure, Buck, I'd love to. He said, here's the deal. I'll meet you at Tuesdays, 5:30 in the morning at Denny's on 183. And I went, come again? 5:30 in the morning? Are you kidding me? And so for the next 2 years, Peter and I met at Denny's on 183 at 5:30 in the morning on Tuesdays. And I discovered so many things I just had no idea about when it came to following Jesus. 2 years into that relationship, he asked me a left field question. And I was like, Peter, what? And here's what he said. Buck, have you ever thought about starting a church? It's like, what? I'm working at Dell. I'm climbing the ladder. I'm making some good money. I can see a good future. I'm saving for retirement. Jill and I want a family. We want, great experiences and all this kind of stuff. Like, Peter, you're off your rocker. And that question led to one thing after another. And here I stand before you today as the pastor at Northpoint. And I never thought this would be part of my life. I'm just telling you, I wouldn't be here, and I wouldn't be doing the things I'm doing without not only the grace of God, but a man by the name of Peter. mean, I think as you think about your life, you can think about these connections, these kind of like, it's almost like this divine appointments in your life of people that have given you such insight into your life or perspective into your life or encouragement or hope. Like when everything around you feels hopeless, it's like, well, that individual or that group or that, this person at work or this neighbor, I mean, they just brought such encouragement, and I really wouldn't be where I am today without them. I'm telling you, do you know what those are called? Those are called providential relationships. Providential means at just the right time. And if you're a God follower or Jesus follower, it almost feels like it's like God put these God put these people in your life at just the right time to allow you to experience things you've never experienced, to allow you to go to places, to allow you to tell your story. And when you do, you're like, man, I'm just telling you, I don't know. It seemed like it. Like that community, that individual, just telling you, made such an impact in my life. That's not only true when it comes to everyday life, but guys, that's also true when it comes to faith. That when I hear faith stories, we watch a baptism story if you've come to Northpoint before, life change stories. I mean, so many incredible life change stories. I hear a story of, a marriage that, that seemed like it was done on the rocks, and man, look at what happened. When I hear a story of somebody who genuinely has like this incredible amount of faith, and I'm like, that's amazing. Tell me about like what led to that in your life. Every time, 99.9% of the time, there are the outliers, but almost every time when I hear a faith story, I hear a providential relationship. Oh, let me tell you about when that person invited me. Oh, let me tell you, that neighbor, or my boss at work, or that friend at school. And there's that providential relationship. I think about my personal life. I've shared this before, but I didn't grow up in a religious home. First 12 years of my life, never went to church. And that's an honest statement, literally never went. Not Easter, not Christmas. My parents were totally out on church. The only time in my 12 years of, the first 12 years of my life I went to church was because my grandparents, my dad's parents, guilted my parents to baptize my sister and I in their church because otherwise we were going to go to hell. And so that was my only time. And I remember I was like 8 or 9. And I remember walking into the church and I was like, it smells terrible in here. And that was my first impression. And then I remember, and I walked to this big old fountain, and I saw this large fella, and he had super hairy arms and a robe. And I don't know why I remember that, but I remember that. And we're standing there, and he says some things, gets a cup, pours it on my head, my sister's head. And I was like, that's it. I'm going to heaven. That was my first impression of church. And I thought, that is so weird. That's my religious upbringing. But when I was 12, my mom became a Christian, a follower of Jesus. And then my dad, and my sister, then I did. And when we tell our faith story, we always talk about Mary Hanks. That Mary Hanks was a colleague of my mom at work. My mom was a hard worker. She was successful at work. She's just a driven woman. She was always trying to improve and get better and better and improve her leadership. And so she was going to this leadership conference that Mary invited her to. And one of the speakers at the leadership conference talked about the greatest leader of all time in world history, Jesus. In 3 years, his leadership changed the world. It's pretty amazing to think about. And then this individual who was communicating talked about the grace of God. My mom had never heard grace of God through the person of Jesus Christ. She'd never heard that. She became a follower, and one thing led to another. My point is when you look at these faith stories of people and their faith just going to that next level, you will almost always find a providential relationship. If I had to summarize it, I would say this, is that staying connected to a community of faith is what grows our faith. And if we're talking about things that actually grow our faith, tangible things that will work in your life, like pragmatically work in your life, I'm just telling you, these relationships, these connections, these providential relationships are so critical to talk about. Now, what's really cool is the author of Hebrews, who wrote the letter of Hebrews in the Bible, he actually believed this and talked about it. And this is the way the author of Hebrews kind of took, in his own words and said that very same thing. He says this, he says, let us hold unswervingly to the hope that we profess, for he who promised is faithful. Now, it's important to know in the context of the letter of Hebrews that the author is writing this to a group of people who are ready to walk away from their faith, the object of their faith, which is Jesus Christ. There were lots of hardships, very difficult circumstances. People were dying, their homes were being confiscated, their reputations were, it's just really hard stuff that was happening. And so they were like, I think I'm done with Jesus. I think I'm walking away. And the author says, no. You don't have to. You don't have to swerve. Unswervingly is this idea to go, don't go to your right. Don't go to your left. Don't make the object of your faith anything other than the person of Jesus Christ. Not the good news, not the bad news, not the good circumstances, the bad circumstances. No, Jesus talked about all that. Go discover what he actually had to say about these things. But don't walk away. Persevere in your faith in Jesus Christ. And it's cool. I love the way the author did this. Look at this. Hold unswervingly to this word. That's an emotional word. Hope. Hope. And there again, that creates a little confusion. Well, I thought faith doesn't equal emotion. But here's what he's saying. He's saying, if you are faithful to the object of your faith, Jesus Christ, the object of your faith, is what fuels your hope. It's what fuels your perseverance in this life. And if you're willing to be faithful and hold on to the object of your faith, there's a promise. For he who promised, his promise is faithfulness. Now, I heard a friend of mine say over the last couple of weeks, he said, Buck, the way I think about this, he said, when we're faithful to the object of our faith, Jesus, we are full of faith. In other words, I just see my life, I see the things around my life in a whole new way. My faith is alive. Now, the author says this, and I think this is a good statement. I think if we kind of wordsmithed it and made it in our common language today, this kind of feels like a religious statement you would find in church. And you're like, good, But the practical question, how? How does that work? What can we do to experience that? Well, the author goes on and tells us and says, and let us consider how we may spur one another on. And I love this. He says, let us consider, in other words, think about it. Think about it. This is a choice. This is something you've got to proactively think about to be in the proximity of a community of faith. Like, this is on you. You can opt in or opt out, but he says, here's what I would say. Consider, think about, how can I be proactive? How can I be involved in this community of faith that providential relationships are going to happen, or odds are they're going to happen, that can spur me on, that can provide insight, that can provide perspective, that can provide hope when I feel like everything around me is hopeless, so that I don't walk away from the object of my faith, which is Jesus, which allows me to experience God's faithfulness. Because I have seen this kind of spurring and encouragement, and I've seen this happen over and over and over. I think about, again, in my life, I think 10 years ago, approximately, it was perhaps one of the darkest moments in my personal life. At that time, my mom had just passed away from cancer, and she told me basically every which way she hopes cancer doesn't do this to her body and that she died in these ways. She was like, I hope that never happens. That's exactly what happened to her. I just watched that over months and months. My dad walked away relationally at the exact same time. My marriage felt like it was pretty much on the rocks. I was like, man, this is not working. And then my sons, and you'll understand this as a parent. There's an age that you start to see your kids cross over. And it's like you see your investment pay off one way or the other. And I was seeing my investment in my sons pay off in a negative way. And I knew I was responsible. They're struggling with their, worth. They're struggling with if their life matters. They're struggling with a lot of things. And I'm like, oh, man, I did that. That was part of my responsibility. And 10 years ago, I sat there and I honestly was contemplating, like, okay, like, Jesus, I love you and all this, but I don't know. And it was a very, very dark moment. And then I met Denise. And Denise is a counselor. And at the time, I thought, man, I would never go to counseling. Man, I got Jesus. I don't need no stinking counselor, That's what I thought. And I'm sitting there with Denise. And Denise says, tell me what's going on. And I tell her my story and everything that's happening and all the doubts and all the questions and all these things I'm wrestling with and theological things and all this kind of stuff. And she said, Buck, that's a lot. And I want to walk with you. But you got to be human. You got to have space to process and be brutally honest with what's going on here and in here. And then she said something I'd never heard before in my life. She said, so Buck, as we process, would you be willing to borrow my faith? I went, what? And she said, Buck, you know my story and her story. Lots of tragic things at the hand of her father. She was 60 at the time. She had seen a lot of things. She'd experienced lots of things. And she said, Buck, here's the deal. I'm going to walk with you, but I'm not in the midst of the emotion. I'm not in the midst of all the pain and the hurt that you're going through and all the questions. I'll walk with you in that, but you need to be human and process those. but I've seen it. I've got perspective. I have insight. I have context. I've seen some of the most hopeless situations that, man, where God has worked. So for the time being, would you allow yourself to be just human and honest and real and borrow my faith that God is faithful? That's called spurring one another on, to not change the object of your faith. And not only that, but the author of Hebrews continues and says, not only does that hold the believe in side of the coin, but look at this. Spur one another on toward love and good deeds. See, there's two sides of the coin. Believe in me. Don't wait. Don't put your faith in circumstances and good jobs and big houses and bank accounts. No, it's Jesus. He has a lot to say about all that. And equally so, follow me. Love and good deeds. Well, that's going to be hard. This is going to come at expense. That's going to be uncomfortable. Well, that's why you need these providential relationships, this kind of community of faith to spur you on towards those love and good deeds. And then the author wraps up and says this: not giving up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another. So the author says, don't give up. Don't give up. Continue to encourage one another. And I always want to kind of push on these things, and I want to go, why? Why? Why not give, why not stop, or give meeting up? Like, well, why? I mean, didn't you see what happened to her? Didn't you see what happened to him? Didn't you see what happened to me? I mean, I think it's pretty logical to give up meeting together. Why not give up meeting together when it comes to faith and faithfulness? What's the big deal? Well, guys, I'm telling you an observation I've made in my life so many times when it comes to faith and these faith communities is that people drift away from their community of faith long before they drift away from their faith. And there are the exceptions to this and the outliers, but they are really rare. I mean, every now and then I'll meet, with somebody who says, hey, I read this, listen to the Sam Harris podcast, who's a, famous atheist, or I read his book, or the late Christopher Hitchens, I read his book, or, Richard Dawkins and the God Delusion, I read that, and then I became an atheist. Like, that is so rare. In fact, I would say, 99.9% of the time, that's not how it works. How it works is, man, I got busy. Or how it works is I believed in Jesus, but the follow part, that wasn't part of my life, and things just got kind of boring. And when I stopped following Jesus, I stopped being intentionally, proactively in the proximity of a community of faith. And it was over time. It was kind of like a frog in a pan. It happened over time. But there's a season with my kids and my job stuff and all these things. I just kept saying no, no, no to that. And before long, I walked away from my faith. So in summary, of course, the author of Hebrews knows this, and he has seen this as well. And in summary, the author of Hebrews is saying, hey, staying connected to a community of faith, guys, that's what grows your faith. That's what allows you to know that you're not alone. Yeah, life can bring some big curveballs and tragedies and traumatic things and hard things, but there's a place, there's a community of faith to go, man, these thoughts, these emotions, these questions, I'm not alone. Other people have this. That there's a community of faith to be spurred on, to say, hey, you can borrow my faith. I mean, that is an incredible dynamic to experience and just be free to process. In the community of faith, you begin to see the faithfulness of God. I mean, if you see the faithfulness of God and all of a sudden, like you saw it in this marriage and you saw it in this individual's life and you saw it with this job thing, before long you can kind of go, okay, there's a lot of, are these coincidences or what's going on? But you get a front row seat to see the faithfulness of God. And when you see the faithfulness of God in other lives, wow, it increases the faithfulness of God in your life. And ultimately, this community of faith is a place to be encouraged, to be spurred, to believe in me, follow me. Believe in me and follow me. And when you believe and you follow and you trust Jesus, I'm telling you, that's what activates your faith to the next level. But it requires a community of faith. Now, I could tell you a lot of stories, and there's a lot of incredible stories out there, but I just want to share one as we wrap up our time. And the story I want to share with you that just illustrates what the author of Hebrews is saying is the story of my friend Maryleigh. And Maryleigh is a person I absolutely love. I've spent a lot of time with Maryleigh. I've heard her story. And her faith and her questions and her authenticity and her realness, if you know Maryleigh, you're like, yep, she's super real. And I love her. And her life and what she's gone through is such a demonstration of what we're talking about today. Take a look.
Growing up, God, Christ specifically, wasn't necessarily a part of my life. And then when I got older, as I experienced really rough times as a teenager, my way of coping was very much down a self-destructive path. And after the wreckage of the self-destruction and some bad choices that I made, I somehow turned to God and Jesus and found a loving relationship that happened to be through church. And I ended up becoming very cemented in my faith. In December 3rd, 2018, I lost my youngest son, Miles. As you can imagine, that impacted every aspect of my life and always will. And it really had an impact on my relationship with God specifically and my faith. After everything I'd been through in my life, and I'd come to such a great place with God and my faith, and I had trusted him to keep my children safe. And so I was just trying to kind of reconcile the two parts of my brain. The one that logically knows that this is the Father that loves me more than anything beyond comprehension. I knew that on one side. And then on the other side, I felt like that rebellious, angry child that doesn't know and doesn't understand why. And when I couldn't trust God at that time, I could at least trust the community I felt like he gave me to support me, to just hang on. And I'm really glad that I did. I knew that the anger and the distance that I had purposely placed between God and myself, I knew that I needed to address that. Not necessarily was I ready to, but I knew that I needed to. After COVID, I decided to join a women's group. I didn't think that I could be genuinely honest about the way that I felt. I didn't want anybody to know the doubts that I had about God, the anger, and at times even hatred. I didn't want anybody to know that. I was afraid if I said that, people wouldn't want me, they would judge me, they would think that I was a bad person. As we grew in our group together and our trust with each other, as we all started to share, I felt comfortable sharing more and more and more with these women. And it was the most amazing experience because I was met with anything but judgment. I was met with complete love. A lot of times the experiences are different, but the hurt is the same. The pain is the same. It was transforming. It was life-changing because we were able to be completely honest with each other about everything and be accepted. And for me, it strengthened my relationship with God because I could understand that if these people could love and forgive me, that he could love and forgive me. Being able to experience the love, the laughter, the joy, the hard times, and the help and support of others, as well as receiving that love, help, and support, it really solidifies the love that God wants us to have.
So I watch her story, I just think to myself, as a mom, I don't think there's anything worse than losing a child far too early. And here's Maryleigh. Lots of questions, lots of doubts, lots of why. And if you talk to her today, and hear her story as we just did, what she discovered is that there is a community of faith that is the safest place in the world to go, can I be real? Can I be honest? And that in that community of faith, she was encouraged, she was spurred, and to hear her say today that it just was the thing that held her, the object of her faith, Jesus Christ, to where she can say today that God loves, that God loves. So guys, here's the thing. I genuinely want all of us to really experience this adventurous, this alive, this active, this bold faith to where you really do know that God is with you, that you see life differently, you see relationships differently. And what I know, it's not the holy grail and just if you just do this one thing, but I'm just telling you, over and over and over, being involved in a community of faith is one of the best things we could possibly do to see our faith go to the next level. So here's what I want to do. We've got about 5 minutes. And in these 5 minutes, I want to give you an opportunity to take that step. And I really want you to do this. I want you to take a step and be proactive and get around a proximity of a community of faith. So what I want to ask you to do at this point is I want you to take out your phones, and on the back of your seats, there is a QR code. And so I want you to get your phones out, scan the QR code. If you're watching or listening online, you can do the same. And if your phone doesn't do QR codes, perhaps you have a Droid, not an Apple device. I mean, that would make sense. Then we have a text number, or number you can text. And so here's what I want you to do. I want you to text "We Are Better Together" to 97000 if you want to text versus a QR code. And I'm going to give you about 20 to 30 seconds to do this. And then I'm going to walk you through. It's just going to give you a form. I'm going to walk you through a form of something we can do to be proactive, to put ourselves in a faith community. So I'll give you about 20 or 30 seconds, and I'll tell you what to do. Okay, so everybody's doing this, right? Even if you're not doing it, just kind of pretend for me. That just makes me feel better. Here we go. Here's the deal. I really want you to do this. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to walk through a couple things that you are seeing or should be seeing on your phone or your device right now. And I'll explain this, give you context, and then we will wrap it up. So as you looked at the QR code, this form should have popped up. It's your name, email, phone number, kind of preferred method of communication. This is so we can just be proactive with you guys and say, hey, here's the different kind of faith communities. We've got all kinds of places and next steps that you could get engaged in. This is not to sign you up to spam you. So if you're worried about that, we're not going to spam you. We're just going to provide information so you can opt in or opt out. That's going to be your choice. And then as you scroll down the form, this is really cool. So what types of groups are there? There's men's, women's, couples, young adults, short-term groups, unsure, other. So this is what I said earlier. I mean, this whole series, we're talking about wherever you're at on the faith spectrum. If you're over here and you go, I have more questions than faith, or if you're over here and you're like, man, my faith feels so alive and active. We've got faith communities for every single one of us. I mean, we've got a faith community that's called Starting Point. Starting Point is that, man, I don't have faith in Jesus. I just have questions about Jesus. Well, this is the safest, it's a short-term group, 5 weeks, that you can be involved in, safest place to ask your questions. I mean, if you're listening to Sam Harris or reading Richard Dawkins or whatever it is, and you're like, hey, can we have an intellectually honest discussion about this? It's a fantastic faith community to be part of. Then we have couples groups, as I just alluded here. We have single mom groups. We have dad groups. We have marriage groups. If you're going like, oh, marriage feels pretty stale, man, a faith community can encourage you to take that next step. In our marriage groups, we have Money Matters, and financially, if you're going, man, our finances are a mess, and I keep not opening or looking at the email from the credit card company, and you want to get to a healthier place, I get that. That's part of a community, helps you take those steps. So here's the deal. I want you to, in general, say, hey, here's what I'm interested in, one of these kind of groups, and then we will respond very specifically with all the kind of groups that you could take a step and be involved in. And last of all, if you scroll to the very bottom, have you been in a group before at Northpoint? Yes or no? And then we provide opportunity for feedback. Because here's the deal. I know we get better when there's feedback happening. And so if you've been involved in a group and you're like, gosh, I think if Northpoint had this or did this, or provide us some sort of feedback to get better, we take that seriously, and we will do everything we can to try to improve and get better at creating these faith communities. So guys, I want you to get involved. I want you to do this. I want you to take a step because I want you to experience that next level kind of faith. Let me pray for us, and then we'll wrap up. God, thanks so much for this moment that we can be together. And Father, here's the thing. You know how this conversation hits us. You know where we're at in our faith. And you know where we're at in terms of opting in or opting out and being involved in a faith community. So Father, my prayer to you is that you just give us the wisdom to know what we need to do. And you ultimately give us the courage to go and do it, to experience something better. I trust you with that, Father. In Jesus' name, amen. Guys, thanks so much for being here. I'll see you next week.